Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Um, just a quick introduction. I see my name is still Yellow Sea Consulting, but my name is Unati Grootboom. I am a consultant at Yellow Sea Consulting, and it's so lovely to have you all here today. Let me just quickly share my screen so that you can see all the good stuff that we have to do today. But before I do that, let me just quickly introduce the lovely panel we have here today. So I'm joined by the lovely Prof. Lemay Kokomur. She is the head of people development at Yellow Sea Consulting, and she is an associate professor at the Northwest University. And I'm also joined by the lovely Tegan Ratledge, who's the head of people intelligence at Yellow Sea Consulting. And we're going to be speaking about an amazing topic today. And I think it's a very pertinent topic into today's world. So let me share my screen again and then we'll get started. But in the meantime, I can just quickly speak about maybe Yellow Seed and what we do. So a little bit into what we do is we really like helping organizations grow through people. So we focus on that modern psychological backing talent solution where we look at your assessments, your talent management principles. We love focusing on learning and development and building people for the future world of work and building people for their organizations. So we love to leave an impact and we love to be able to use our science-based backing in terms of industrial psychology to be able to leave that impact. So very excited to get into the employee well-being space, which we're going to be speaking about today, and building a resilient workforce. I think in COVID, we've seen from COVID to now the importance of employee well-being, the importance of focusing on employee well-being not being a tick box activity, but more so looking at it as a strategic driver. So, Ken. What we'll be doing is looking at the case of well-being from your perk to your driver. We're looking at the case of well-being from that perk to that performance driver. So moving it from that tick box activity to moving it towards that strategic driver that's really important for us. So Teague, you can go into the next slide. What we've seen is well-being has become now a leadership and that talent priority. So as we've been going along in terms of it, we've been seeing that in the hybrid changing world, well-being isn't soft. It's really, really strategic now. And what we've seen is it's less about squeezing hours in the day. It's about how we show up during those hours. Energy is now the currency of performance. And like any high performing system, whether it's through your machine, your team, or your individual, we really need regular, proactive recharging, not just those last minute rescues when we're burnt out already. We've seen the shift, which means that we're moving from that reactive approach to a preventative approach into well-being. And we need to build that ritual to be able to sustain energy, whether it's your physical, your emotional, your mental, and even spiritual energy throughout the day, throughout the week, and throughout the year. It's not about working harder, but also more about moving sustainably. So as we look at it, we look at high well-being, looking at high performance. If you do have a high well-being work environment, a high well-being work environment in the sense that people are really driving towards sustainability in that sense and driving towards an emotional, mental, spiritual sense, you will have a high performing work environment. As we've seen with employees with high well-being, we've seen that they're really 3 times more likely to be engaged. In that sense, they really have that high performance. They're really highly engaged in terms of their work environment. And you can move into the next aspect. They're 6 times more likely to be resilient. Your highly engaged people are really people who are actively trying to push themselves and who are really resilient in the case of their work environment. They're 29% more likely of thriving at their work environment overall in the organization. And lastly, the organizations that are prioritizing well-being see a 11% higher profitability and 41% lower in terms of absenteeism. Now, when it comes to the cost of neglecting well-being, we see that burnout is not just a personal failing, it really is a systemic signal. 76% of employees experience burnout at least sometimes. That's 3 out of every 4 people. And burnout doesn't just affect the individual, it has that ripple effect across teams and the entire organization. Employees experiencing burnout actually have 2.6 times more likelihood of actively seeking new jobs. So if we're seeing that high turnover, we really need to ask ourselves, is it really about the pay or is it about sustainability? Burnout also really does result in that 63% higher absenteeism, which really impacts on our delivery timelines, maybe creates pressure on the rest of the team, and also erodes that morale that we really want to look forward to. It also does lower that innovation, it lowers your trust, and it becomes a bit of a toxic team dynamic. So we really do want to move away from having that cost of neglecting well-being instead of it being that tick box that we stay saying, but moving towards that strategic driver for performance and strategic driver for success. As we say that well-being is imperative, it's no longer optional. 92% of employees say that well-being is equally as important as salary. As we're seeing in our Gen Zs and our millennials, we're seeing that they're really prioritizing their mental and emotional health. It's become a big thing for them these days. And with Deloitte, they found that employers who invest in mental health see a 4 times return on investment. You'll see that in terms of investing in your mental health, you'll see higher productivity, which we were saying from the beginning. That's how well-being works for you. That's why we say leadership shapes the climate for well-being. Teams with empathetic leaders have reported that 2 times more psychological safety. You have your 3 times higher in trust and your 40% higher engagement. So in this case, 70% of team climate is really directly influenced by your leaders' behavior. Having your leaders emphasize well-being shows that you'll have that higher trust, have that psychological safety, and really have that higher engagement in that case. We can also see that we keep saying well-being is an HR's job, but no, it's not. It's actually culturing that core leadership responsibility in an organization. Now, why should managers care about well-being? When it comes to your team's well-being, it can affect your team performance. As a manager, it can affect your leadership reputation and overall your career success. 75% of workplace well-being is really influenced by a person's manager. Your manager can either be a multiplier or a drainer on your team. If your manager is able to take into consideration your well-being, take into consideration those drivers in terms of success, listen, which is very important when it comes to your well-being, then they can be a multiplier in terms of your team's energy. And you'll see that in the productivity that is showing throughout the process. Well-being drives managerial success. So managers with healthy teams spend 30% less time on conflict resolution, report significantly lower stress, and have a higher rated leadership success and effectiveness in this case. When we see teams with high well-being, we see more production, less absenteeism, as it's 41%, and 59% lower in turnover, which is amazing to see. And these stats are not just stats. These stats are actively showing you that well-being is so important to an organization's long-term success. So when leaders demonstrate that they care, psychological safety goes up, your innovation and your collaboration increases. And a Harvard study found that employees with caring managers were 3 times more likely to be able to stay and perform, as you don't want to leave an organization where you feel like someone cares about you, where someone feels like they're listening to you and listening to your needs and tailoring your needs to what you need. So the manager's mood is a lot more contagious, positively or negatively. Now, the competitive edge. Leading for well-being protects your well-being too. Managers are burning out too. 50% of managers say that they're exhausted. 2 in 5 managers want to quit due to a lot of stress that they held and they feel and that's perceived for them. And when you're feeling all of this, you can't lead well if you're not well. Next, prioritizing well-being can reduce the following: your emotional labor in this case, constant crisis management. If you prioritize your well-being, crisis management will be averted. We won't be having um, issues, disagreements in the workplace as well-being is being prioritized. And decision fatigue is decreased in this case too. What do great managers do differently? They're able to check in on you weekly on workload and stress. Those rhythms are constantly happening with you and your manager. You're able to talk to them about well-being and goals. Think about that psychological safety because you're able to feel like you can open up to them in that case. They're approachable, consistent, and human. And 89% of employees with thriving well-being say that their manager genuinely cares. So listening, feedback rhythms, understanding where you're coming from, that's an important trait to have as a great manager. And then lastly, well-being is the new competitive edge. It's not just a cost, it's a capability. Managers who lead for well-being are able to retain that top talent as it's that capability that is constantly being retained. People who are happy at an organization are going to want to stay at the organization. It builds that loyalty and trust within the organization, and it creates high-performing and high-belonging teams. That's the competitive edge. Everyone wants that in that case. And this is something that we really need to take note of as we move throughout the session, that we're moving from that tick box activity in terms of 1.0 and well-being to that 3.0 in terms of it being that strategic driver for leadership. So LeMay is going to take over and just give us a little more insight into the well-being upgrade of 3.0.
Thanks, Unati. All right, so just latching on to what Unati was saying, we all know well-being is important. I think over and above the stats, we're all living it, right? So we all understand how important it is. Well, especially often in the groups that we are in, and we're probably preaching to the converted already. But what we wanted to talk about today is really what is the difference between impactful well-being initiatives and moving from a 1.0 well-being, which I'll explain in a moment, to really how do we upgrade? How do we ensure that we're optimizing and really moving the needle and making an impact? And it was so interesting just in preparing for today's webinar. I followed the Gallup research. I have followed it over the years. And it's interesting to see how some of the stats have differed. So in 2020, there was a huge increase in employees saying, it's so nice to see that my organization really does care about my well-being and that there are efforts. So the rate there was 49%. And in the 2023 report, which is the latest one, we haven't seen the 2024 one release yet, that stat went down to 24%. So there really is a decrease in employees being satisfied with how much organizations care. And also interesting research that just shows that most of the programs that are implemented don't have a significant enough impact. You can see that stat there. And so that really is what we want to address at Yellow Seed and how we think about any intervention. But in this particular case, we're talking about well-being. And so we want to move from where probably COVID, pre-COVID, a lot of it was just around how do we survive? How do we implement maybe isolated initiatives? So we know we need to maybe do a stress management workshop. Here's some free healthy food. Here's an app. Here's, isolated initiatives that's a lot more reactive. And honestly, it's very focused on our employee value proposition. How do we get the perks that we need? And when we were preparing, the three of us spoke about this metaphor of a battery. And if you look at, I've got an entire battery pack in my garage with multiple batteries. And when one battery dies, it immediately impacts the whole system, the grid system. We have to reduce the energy, we have to reduce what we're needing to use through that system. And so, I wanted to think about how that battery picture plays out. And I think with Wellbeing 1.0, it's really us trying to, here's a battery pack, just quickly use it, go into the stress management workshop, quickly charge, but then we're going to take the battery pack back again. It's not a sustainable way of recharging the system. Wellbeing 2.0 in our minds is a lot better because it's more structured, but it's still quite reactive and fragmented. So you might have a wellness program, you might have an employee assistance program, and there might be a structured schedule of activities, but it's not integrated. And so this might be having access to charges, but it's not always on, it's not always available, it's not integrated. And then Wellbeing 3.0 is really what we're trying to move towards, where it's holistic, it's human-centric, and it's strategic. And so what we're looking at is really hardwiring well-being into the way that we lead, how we design work, how we measure success. And so building a recharging infrastructure. So if you think about how electric cars are being introduced, especially in South Africa, and how that infrastructure is being placed at very strategic points so that when you need to recharge to reach your destination, the infrastructure is there. And so building it into the way that we're doing things so that at any time you can recharge your batteries and perform at peak, no longer needing to reduce the performance that we require. So what does that mean in practice, Lumay? What are you getting up to? And so I wanted to just share a bit more detail of what that 3.0 upgrade might look like. And so as we said, Wellbeing 1.0, really around perks and programs, 2.0 having a bit more integrated initiatives, but 3.0 is where we're looking at strategic, human-centric, and it's in our culture. And so the mindset of a 1.0 is that it's a perk, it's a benefit. 2.0, we're saying it's important, but we're not as proactive as we perhaps could be. Whereas with 3.0, our mindset is how do we enable this as a strategic driver of performance, innovation, and the right culture that we want to create. And later on, we'll talk a lot about performance and innovation, which is often what we're trying to drive in our organization to match what the environment is requiring of us. And well-being is absolutely an enabler of those characteristics. If we look at the purpose, so with Wellbeing 1.0, it's often about boosting morale, reducing sick days, and it's the responsibility of HR mostly. Maybe leaders would agree in a passive way, but they're not actively driving it. For Wellbeing 2.0, the purpose could be increasing engagement. We understand that it's important about retaining talent, and we're starting to get leaders to be more involved, to show actively that they care, and so there is a start of shared responsibility. But then what we're moving to in 3.0 is really helping employees thrive, and that mindset of when our employees thrive, we will unlock that collective energy. We'll unlock what we need for sustainable strategic deployment. And so therefore, it's absolutely critical that everyone owns well-being. Tegan will talk about the responsibility of the individual versus the leader versus the organization, but we really need to think about it as a systemic responsibility. We think about measurement. So in Wellbeing 1.0, we're really just tracking participation. Who joined our wellness day? Who joined our stress management course? Who's actually using our app, our wellness app? Whereas what we want to get to is having a more detailed view of holistically how are we addressing well-being? Are we seeing it in our team resilience? Are we seeing it in performance? Are we seeing it in our engagement surveys and the multiple areas that we're measuring? And so to get to that point, we need to have a human-centered design that's co-created with employees, that's holistic, that's strategically oriented. We start with our strategy to define if this is what we're looking for, if these are the skills, the competencies, the resources, the workforce that we need, how does that impact from a well-being point of view? And it's really about changing that mindset of it's not on top of, it's not, often when we work with line managers, they'll say, I've got so many things now, I have to worry about the well-being of my team as well. Now I need to send them to this well-being course when, we're already so swamped with activities. And so it's switching that up with, to get to your goals, to get to your strategic enablers, this is what is required. So it's not on top of, it's actually enabling what we need to do. And so from an integration point of view, we really need to move from having a siloed activities and schedule of activities to it being embedded in the way that we manage talent, the way that we drive leadership, team, culture strategies, etc. And the return on impact or the return on investment that we're wanting to get is really driving performance, driving innovation, driving trust, driving retention. Those are the key metrics that we're actually looking for. Yes, we'll track, we will track participation. I'm not saying that that's not important, but that is not sufficient because that's actually not telling us the story of what we're needing to get to. And I think that's why that stat of 70% of wellness programs actually fail is what we're seeing, because we're not able to track the ROI and really address the systemic, holistic view of well-being. And so from an integration point of view, as I said, really starting with what is the strategic drivers that we're focusing on, how do we translate that into well-being? And instead of having a well-being program that's kind of run on its own, to really think about how does well-being and our DEIB interventions or initiatives, how do those speak to each other? The same with culture, leadership, our learning programs, our succession and mobility planning, the way that we do workforce planning, all of that actually has an impact on the well-being of our staff and have the opportunity to improve well-being. And I'll talk about the practicality just now. Wanted to actually just show you as an example how we've started to look at incorporating well-being into succession, which traditionally, so a lot of us might think, but what does well-being have to do with succession? This is a framework that we use all the time, that we have designed, and what we've seen is that proven impact, backward looking. Do you have the values? Are your values aligned? That's the A block. Do you have the impact and expertise that is needed? Absolutely. When we're looking for successors, those are the things that we look at. We also look at future potential. We want to understand your aspiration, your drive. We want to understand whether you've got the cognitive agility, the leadership capability, or the future-focused capability. So we know future potential is needed. And about 3-4 years ago, that was our model. We looked at proven impact and we looked at future potential. But in the last 2-3 years, we've started to incorporate something that we've coined as vitality to be that missing link. You could have all the goods in terms of potential. You could have the proven track record. But if you are not filling your tank, you will not show up as a successful, high-performing individual. And so how do we understand resilience? How do we understand well-being as that missing link? So that we are not just looking for successors that hypothetically will be ready, but successors who are actively investing in their energy tanks. And when we get them into that position, they will be ready. They will have the energy, they will have the engagement, they will have the resilience that is required to be successful. So just as an example of how we incorporate well-being into succession planning. But what I wanted to go into as the next step, and Tegan will take us even further into the practicality, is really in terms of moving towards that 3.0 state, we need to go back to the science. Many of us on the call are scientists, psychologists who have been trained to do things that make a real impact. We do things by approaching it from a scientific perspective. Now, there's no problem with doing yoga sessions and stress management courses and free healthy food at work. All of those are beautiful initiatives and can show a positive impact. I think my question would be, how are you integrating the science behind what will move the needle? Are you building a well-being program holistic? Holistic meaning we're not just targeting physical health, we're targeting mental, psychological, psychological, mental is often similar, social, financial, spiritual. We're understanding that a human being is a holistic human being. Are we targeting it in a human-centered design perspective? And that's really where the science comes in. If we understand the science behind well-being, we can design initiatives that will actually make an impact, that will move the needle. Are we driving strategic well-being programs, strategic well-being initiatives that are aligned to where the business is at, but is also aligned to what the individual needs based on often just their human makeup, their neuroscience, what they are going through. To take us into a Kahoot, and let me just quickly get the right screen to talk through some of these science points and just to remind us of what do we need to keep in mind when we are designing 3.0 interventions. So Tegan, can you confirm that you can see my Kahoot screen?
I can see your Kahoot screen.
Okay, awesome. So please take out your phones. For those of you that don't know Kahoot, you can go into your browser and type in www.kahoot.it, and it's going to ask you for a PIN. You can enter that PIN. You can then choose whichever name you want to. It can be your real name. It can be your pseudonym. It can be your the name that you wish your parents gave you. And you can also play around with your avatar as we just wait for everyone to join in. Can you hear the music, Tegan? I don't know if I shared with music.
No, we can't hear it.
Ah, that's okay. You don't need to. It's just lovely music, but it's
You
okay.
can sing for us.
I can hear it in my ear, so let me just put it off. Cool. All right. I'm just going to give it another second or so as many of you still join. How many do we have on the call right now?
Around 80.
Okay, cool. So we've got quite a few still to go. If you are multitasking and cooking or driving while you listen to the webinar, don't worry. You will still be able to follow along, even if you're not able to sign in. You'll miss out on all the fun, but you still will be able to sign in, so that is okay.
You maybe want to make it your full screen. Maybe just the competitiveness in me so we don't miss an answer option.
There we go. So just as a reminder, www.kahoot.it, and then that will be the game pin 189991, and you can include your name and choose an avatar. These avatars are so fun. Okay. Awesome. So I am going to get us going. It seems like many of us are maybe multitasking, but just in the interest of time, I'm going to get us going. So maybe just for those of you that are new to Kahoot, you will be using your phone as your joystick, as your entering device. And there will be questions on the screen, a question at the top with either a true or false or a multiple choice. And that multiple choice will be color coded. So you can either see the color that you want to choose on your phone, or there are shapes. So if you're colorblind, you can also use the shape to pick the answer that you think is correct. So super competitive, as Lisa alluded to. And we will also just take a note of our winner so that we can give you a prize at the end of the session. And the fastest fingers win. So there's a tip. If you are faster and you get the correct answer, you will have higher points. Okay, cool. So let's get going. And remember, this is about the science surrounding well-being. We're going to talk about what is the science around stress, rest, productivity. I'm going to share about the science around your thinking, around connection and how it impacts well-being. I'll share about purpose and how that influences meaning. And so all of this is really to get us back into what do we need to do to design well-being initiatives that will actually make a big impact, that will drive those key drivers like innovation and trust and problem solving, etc. Because when we have people who thrive, they will perform. And so how do we get to that state? All right, let's get going. So our first question, 3, 2, 1, is a multiple choice. So which of the following is a typical brain response when employees experience chronic stress and poor well-being? Which of these? Okay, well done. I can see we've got a lot of experts in the room. So we all know about the fight or flight response, right? So the amygdala, when it is constantly exposed to stress, will be activated, and it'll activate that fight or flight fear response. Now, what we know, when the amygdala is hyperactive, it shuts down our prefrontal cortex, which is the parts of our brains that are that drives innovation, that drives empathy, that drives creative thinking. And so we know that when we are in chronic stress, our amygdalas are hijacking the entire system. And so well-being will then tend to decrease. Another interesting stat is that if this continues, it also shrinks our hippocampus, which is our memory center. And so that constant state of stress, and some of the research that I did yesterday actually showed that two of the main stressors that's coming up in a lot of the local South African research studies shows the number one and number two stress is the workplace and financial stress, which, I think no one's surprised by that. But if workplace is one of the top stressors, how do we address that systemically? How do we ensure that we don't have individuals who have overstimulated amygdalas constantly trying to be innovative in our meetings, because their brains will just not be able to recoup with that? Which leads me into some of the next questions, is really about the importance of rest and how we can tap into the science of rest to bring in well-being. All right, let's see who is in the lead. Well done, V and Anne and M. Next question, again, multiple choice. How long is the brain's optimal deep focus cycle before needing rest? When do we need a break? Let's see. Okay. So the correct answer is 90 minutes. So research shows us that more or less at the 90-minute interval, our brain stops to function optimally. And so that is the point where we absolutely need a recovery break. Now, over and above some of the research that around deep focus also talks about consistent deep focusing. There's a lovely book by Cal Newport around this concept of deep work and deep focus. And a lot of what our typical rhythms and our typical work environment introduces, things like constantly going from meeting to meeting, having notifications pop up all the time, and what that does to our brains. You know, the misnomer of being able to multitask is actually exactly that. It's a misnomer, because we are actually task switching. We're switching from one task to another task, and our ability to focus deeply, our ability again to innovate, to problem solve, to move into complexity, is severely reduced. There's even one study that mimicked and said that it impacts our IQ to the when we are in task switching mode, and it reduces our IQ, our problem solving ability, to a similar extent compared to when we are intoxicated. And so when we are constantly switching from meeting to meeting, from phone to notification on WhatsApp, then I'm on an email, and I'm not really able to focus deeply, we are reducing our IQ tremendously. The other thing that I wanted to highlight in terms of deep focus and the science behind deep focus is also understanding the around the cycles of rest. It's understanding how much energy is actually required from thinking work, from knowledge work, especially in a hybrid working environment. Many of our working environments require a lot of remote work. And so we are not exerting physical energy, but the data actually shows us that your brain consumes at least 20% of your energy, whether you're sitting still, no matter what you're doing. So even think about the rest cycle that is required for you to go into that deep focus. When you are sitting in front of the TV and mindlessly scrolling through whatever, fill in the gap, Instagram, Facebook, Netflix, whatever that might be, remember that you are still using 20% of your energy to do those activities. And so it's also thinking about what can I do that actually gives my mind a break. When, for me personally, I'm a runner. And so when I run, I am intentionally giving my mind a break to wander, to think about whatever it wants to think about. In the winter, I love to do that while I'm taking a bath or while I am praying and meditating. So just also remembering that cycle of rest and deep focus is quite important. And how do we help our employees understand, our managers even, understand the rhythms that is required for stress and rest? Okay, let's see. KJ and Champion, well done. And Shweta also coming up. Nice to see you, Shweta. All right, next question. Again, multiple choice. According to research, when does the brain consolidate learning and ideas most effectively? When does that happen? Okay, well done. So absolutely, this happens during rest and downtime, especially in our sleeping time. And it actually, when we go to sleep, it activates our default mode network. And that is a process that actually debriefs everything that happened during the day. It allows you to consolidate a lot of your memory. It has a very strong link to creativity. And so, again, just understanding the science behind rest, understanding the science behind sleep, understanding, and I could do a whole talk. I'm really passionate about sleep science and understanding REM sleep and deep sleep and the number of hours that we need to sleep to actually complete that rest cycle. When we're not sleeping enough, our toxins are not removed as they should be. Our brains are not able to actually remove the waste. We were talking about in the week about the movie Inside Out 2 and how it just showed so brilliantly how important it is to sleep and to rest and to actually complete the cycle of the brain. If we don't do that, we will not have a positive well-being impact. And so how are we educating? How are we optimizing, even the always on thinking of, well, if I am responding to emails at 11 o'clock at night, because that's when my manager is reaching out, how does that impact my sleep patterns? Am I resting enough? And what we're actually doing is we think we're putting in an extra hour. Let me just work another hour so that I can get, tick something off that I don't have to do tomorrow. But I always say you're actually stealing from your future. You're actually impacting your productivity from tomorrow. But yeah, let me not say too much about sleep. Awesome. Elle is the highest climber. Well done, Elle, who's up 14 places. Let's go to the next one. So wanted to highlight, there's a fantastic book by Steve Magnus and Brad Stulberg called Peak Performance that talks about the science of productivity. And we'll share the slides. So I'm not going to go through all of the detail, but just highlighting that productivity is not linear, and understanding this is almost the flip side of well-being, right? When we have people who are thriving, what we will see is productivity. And if we are not actively investing in our rest, we will not see neither well-being nor productivity. Our brains were not designed for 8-hour marathons of focused work. I get to my laptop at 8 a.m. and I only get up at 4 a.m. or maybe, my body forces me to get up for a quick loo break. But that is just not how our brains are wired. Productivity works in cycles. And these two scientists studied such a broad array of top performers. They looked at chess players, they looked at athletes, they looked at business leaders, they looked at entrepreneurs, and they tried to find the common denominator of what was that difference that really helped highlight the peak performers. And the one thing that they could find that all of them had in common was they all had intentional rest strategies. They were able to build a cadence of rhythms that they understood, and it looked different for each individual, but they tapped into that cadence and rhythm of stress plus rest, stress plus rest. And it was fascinating to understand around elite athletes who are all equal in terms of physical capability and talent, typically. And the difference really was how those elite athletes that were as intentional with their training and then equally intentional with their rest rhythms were the ones that outperformed. You would think the ones that put in more work, that put in longer hours of training, were the ones that performed best. And it was actually the opposite. Those were the ones that often had injuries, who were not able to maintain that peak performance. And so it applies to our working environment as well. If you think about just some of the outdated productivity cultures that we've got going in most workplaces. We've got back-to-back meetings where there's no recovery time. We've got always on expectations where I either need to be able to get hold of you on WhatsApp, on Teams, on email, but you need to be able to respond at any time. We've got a lot of micromanagement, especially with remote work being introduced, where I don't trust you anymore. I will tell you exactly how to do it, when to do it, when you need to, or how you need to do it. And we often celebrate overwork or late nights. It's seen as this person is willing to go the extra mile because they are working late. And there is a cost, unfortunately. We see an increase in focus. You've seen the research now. We see an increase in burnout. We see all of those stats that Unati showed. And so really thinking through from a well-being point of view, when we're implementing an initiative, how are we supporting the cycles of productivity instead of ignoring it or not even addressing it at all. All right, next question. How many of the thoughts we think each day are repetitive or negative, according to neuroscience research? How many of the thoughts that we have are negative? Hey, yes, indeed, 70%. That's super depressing, but it is indeed true. So a lot of, and this has been confirmed over multiple studies, but I want to maybe just list one if you wanted to go and look. So the National Science Foundation estimates that our negative thoughts are around 70 to 80% of all thoughts, and 90% of our thoughts are actually repetitive. And so, from a well-being perspective, it's about understanding how that impacts our energy levels. It is extremely draining on our energy. It impacts our mindset. We talk a lot about growth mindset, now how difficult it is to maintain a growth innovation mindset when we just let our thoughts or our negative thoughts go unhindered. It impacts our relationships. It impacts even the way that we manage our finances. So I'm really just thinking about the neural pathways, your natural neural pathways, and how we help our employees to counter some of those unhelpful beliefs. And many of you are psychologists, so many of you will be familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's exactly what that theory talks about, right? And how there's so much research that actually supports this as quite an effective way of improving well-being. And it starts with your beliefs. It starts with your thoughts. If you want to improve well-being, you start with your thinking, because thinking influences your physical body, it influences your behavior. So I'm a Christian, and even from a faith point of view, it makes so much sense to understand that we are body, soul, and spirit. And if we're wanting to work in a dimension, to start with the soul, with the thinking, because that has such an impact on the body. That doesn't mean that the body doesn't impact thinking. It often does, especially when we've gone through trauma. Trauma will definitely impact our thinking as well. But the majority of the time, it is our thinking that actually influences our bodies. And so, how do we drive well-being initiatives, well-being programs, well-being, even leadership training that supports the active management of our thinking? How do we change perspectives? How do we incorporate technique? And I'm just calling out CBT, but there are many, many techniques. David Rock is another one that I'm quite a big fan of, as well as Dr. Caroline Leaf, who teaches individuals to take control of their thinking, to not believe everything that they're thinking. Number one, most of us think all of our thoughts are fact and real, when in fact they probably aren't. And so how do we think about our thinking? How do we manage that thinking and really do that systemically? Another something that we spoke about this morning when Tegan and Unati and I were just round-robining about today's session. We also spoke about how important it is to bring this into the systemic view. So it's wonderful that there are, for example, employee assistance programs where employees can go outside of the system to work on their thinking. The challenge, however, is they come back into the system where day in and day out, they still have 70% negative thoughts. And how do we bring that systemically into the business, whether it be through reminders or prompts or leadership cues or, let me not steal Tegan's thunder. So there's a lot of initiatives that we can use to bring it into the system rather than sending them out of the system. All right, let's see. KJ and Shweta and Rico up 17 places. Well done. Okay, next one. What part of the brain helps us feel with others by mirroring their emotions and even their physical state? What part of our brains allow us to do that? Okay. So there is something called mirror neurons in our brain. This is by far my favorite piece of neuroscience. And what mirror neurons do, it allows us to actually experience what others are experiencing. So this is what is activated when we are empathizing. It allows us to feel what someone else is feeling, even though we're not going through that same experience. So if you see someone else crying and you're really leaning in, listening, leaning in physically, your brain will connect with the other person's brain and you will start to feel what the other person is feeling. And this is a neurological phenomenon. Um, what's fascinating about mirror neurons is that when I'm hearing someone else's story, my neurons are mirroring what I'm hearing. But then there's a feedback or a loop back to the other individual who has shared their story, has shared their pain, and has been met with another human being who created safety, who was able to empathize, maybe not just jump with, oh, but here's the advice, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, but someone who is willing to listen and just empathize and just listen out what they are going through. And what is just so beautiful is that what actually happens in the brain of the individual who shares their story is that many of the other areas in their brain lights up. And what we're actually seeing happening is that often those trauma neurons that typically are formed as part of the fear structure, the amygdala structure, gets unhooked and is able to flow into our prefrontal cortex, which is the parts of our brains that can think about something logically, that can debrief and resolve and understand that, oh, that was then, this is now. And so, yeah, I mean, this just baffles my brain that if we think about compassion, love, connection, empathy, listening, there's a whole science behind that that actually shows if we are able to activate more of those responses, we will have people who have higher well-being because it will unhook a lot of the trauma that they're experiencing, a lot of the pain that they might be carrying. It actually lightens the load. Neurologically, it lightens the load. I actually also love that the connection with psychological safety starts to become very, I mean, we know there is a science behind it, but it's just so beautiful to see the neuroscience that when we create psychological safety in whether it be a one-on-one or in a team interaction, to enable, for example, storytelling, to enable containment, it ups the well-being like nothing else can. And so here's for me the greatest impact from a 2.0 to a 3.0 is psychological safety. If there's one thing that we can focus on to really improve well-being, it would be this. It would be creating psychological safety, bringing in empathy and compassion, because the impact that it has on our ability to perform and thrive and be well and be resilient, it just shoots through the roof. All right, let's see who is leading. Well done, KJ and Shweta and Kay. Awesome. All right, next question. According to research, how does chronic loneliness impact our health? How does chronic loneliness impact our health? So we're still talking about the science of connection and how that impacts well-being to help us deliver better results. Yeah, very, very true. So most of you guessed it. This is a stat by, I'm going to just read it here, by Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstedt. And she found that chronic loneliness increases the risk of early death by nearly 30%, which, yeah, I mean, that's just mind-boggling. Some of the other impacts on the body. So when we feel isolated, our nervous system is in a constant low-grade state of threat. Our cortisol increases, our inflammation rises, our immune function drops, and the body stays in a constant fight or flight. And so if we think about just the impact on well-being and, some of the cultural nuances that we sometimes find in organizations, or let's say even in teams, where people are feeling isolated, where there's a lot of silos, where there's a lot of blaming and fault finding and blame shifting, and where individuals feel completely alone, where they don't feel that they have any support in their colleagues, especially in remote only environments, where no one is checking in how I'm doing, where am I recovering from the flu, what it's like to have a new puppy, or whatever is happening in my life, that feeling of isolation and being alone has a very detrimental impact on our well-being. And so how do we practically address isolation? It also highlights that link to all of the DIB efforts that we're making, because belonging is really what we're talking about, right? So we're talking about how do we ensure that an individual feels like they are belonging. And this just proves the point of well-being is as much a culture initiative as it is a diversity initiative, as it is a leadership initiative, as it is a workforce planning initiative. If we're creating projects and we're putting teams together, how are we driving or alleviating the symptoms of isolation? All right, let's see again. Well done, Pietri and KJ still in the lead. Next one, again, multiple choice. Which of the following activates the same brain regions as physical pain? And how does this help us initiate targeted well-being initiatives? Okay, yes. So the same regions light up when we experience exclusion or social rejection. Our brains interpret it as physical pain, and so the responses are exactly the same. And I suppose it emphasizes the previous point around isolation and how important, again, psychological safety is. But it also helps us think about when we're putting well-being initiatives in place, we need to be thinking about how do we build team cohesiveness? How do we incorporate deeper understanding of where teams are at, where individuals are at? How do we create a heightened awareness of different personalities, different triggers, different needs? How do we support cultural awareness? All of those things that will actually help us to create or address social rejection through, for example, psychological safety, through empathy, compassion, active listening, etc. All of those are actually well-being initiatives. They are OD initiatives for sure. That's probably where the KPIs would sit. But it's also understanding that they are part and parcel of our well-being program. If we're not supporting our teams, if we're not supporting leaders in how to enhance collaboration, enhance psychological safety, we're missing the mark. We're not doing what we need to do when it comes to well-being. I wanted to highlight and made a note here, another thing around social rejection and isolation. The opposite of that, also just highlighting the power of oxytocin. So when we connect with another human being, this is heightened in its pure form through a mother and a baby, but we see that all the time. The moment you connect with another human being, and there's a bit of trust that's being built, a bit of safety that's being built, our brains secrete oxytocin, and oxytocin reduces our stress. It supports innovation and creativity. And so the flip side, from a neuroscience point of view, is also possible. Even though social rejection has such negative impacts, the opposite actually shows that when we increase oxytocin, we are actually supporting well-being, we're supporting resilience, we're supporting our ability to thrive. All right, we've got 3 more questions. Well done, KJ again, and B and CK also, and Sam as the highest climber. Multiple choice. What effect does chronic unforgiveness have on the body? This was an interesting one for me, to think about unforgiveness and how that impacts well-being, but quite an important one. Okay, correct. Well done, the answers. So when we are in a culture where we are constantly blaming, we get defensive when we make mistakes, or when others give us feedback, when it's not safe to actually admit that I made a mistake, we typically see the culture of unforgiveness. And here's what it does to our body. So unforgiveness increases our cortisol levels, it elevates our heart rate and blood pressure, it increases muscle tension, it reduces sleep and immune function. And so again, just from a culture point of view, from a well-being point of view, how do we ensure that we are improving things like humility? We're modeling perspective taking, being able to hear what the other person is saying, even when we are in conflict, even when I completely disagree with what you might be saying. How do we celebrate accountability rather than blame, so that we are not experiencing those negative well-being effects of unforgiveness and driving a blame culture? All right, well done, champion. Second last question. What is the brain's reward system activated by when we find meaning in our work? Which hormones are secreted when we find meaning in our work? And how does this alleviate some of the science behind well-being? Okay, yes, it secretes dopamine. That's our feel-good hormones, one of our feel-good hormones. And dopamine has a very positive impact on our ability to cope with stress. So it improves our resilience. And we are able to withstand a lot more setbacks when we understand the why. So if we're able to really see the purpose behind something, not just this is what you need to do, we're not going to explain why. I mean, it's change management 101, right? But it's also interesting to see how it impacts the brain and how it impacts the body physically, our ability to thrive, our ability to be resilient. And so how do we tap into meaning, into purpose? There's a whole field of science around positive psychology that teaches us to tune into purpose and meaning. And how do we try? You can be the cleaner and you can do meaningful work. It doesn't mean that it's only the president of a country that is able to do meaningful work, but it's how we position, it's how we target the messages, the purpose of the organization, the strategy. You can really enhance the dopamine in someone's brain by being more focused on meaningful work. All right, was this a tough round? 6 participants lost their answer streak. Okay. Last question, last chance to kick Shweta or KJ off of their throne. So true or false? According to SADAG, over 80% of HR leaders report experiencing burnout. This is a 2024 stat. Is that true or false? Indeed. Sure. zero saying false. That's because we all feel that stat. And this was such a sad stat for me to actually put in today's webinar. The last time I checked this data was in 2021, and I saw that, the majority of HR leaders experience burnout. And I really hoped that when I checked it again today for an updated report, that the data had gone down, that the stat had gone down, but it didn't. And so I think this is where I really want to end off in terms of the science behind Wellbeing 3.0, right? If we are wanting to drive wellbeing initiatives that count, that make a difference, that have an impact, we have to start with ourselves. You can't give something that you don't have. There's a picture that I heard this morning that I just wanted to share. It just explains so much of this. When a surgery takes place, we sterilize the room, we sterilize all of the instruments, we sterilize the entire environment. In our language, we make it safe. We make the environment safe so that when that healing procedure needs to happen, that individual is placed into a safe environment. But the doctor that is facilitating that healing process also does something to make it safe. They scrub before they go into the operating room, and they do that for a long time so that they are not bringing any of their own harmful things into the operating room. And I just love that picture of thinking that we are the surgeons. We are the ones that are facilitating often, most often. We are the ones that are facilitating the healing process. We are having those conversations. We are driving the strategic initiatives. We are playing coach, whether you've been appointed as the coach or not, you're in those conversations. And if you are not putting in the proactive work into yourself, you will bring your own stuff into the healing room. You will bring your own potentially hurtful things into that healing process. So before I give over to Tegan, I really want to ask each of you to think about, am I resting intentionally? Am I putting the boundaries in place that I keep on telling my employees to put into place? Am I always on? Am I advocating a healthy working style, a healthy working environment? Have I experienced the victory in terms of well-being? Because if we look at the stat, most of us will be inclined to say, no, I'm not resting enough, I'm not exercising enough, I don't feel like I'm thriving, whether it be social, spiritual, in my relationships, in my wherever those areas might be. And so it's really asking quite a important question of where do I need to put on the oxygen mask first, so that I can then role model what well-being is all about. There's no use in, we've got this sexy app, well-being app that we've now, rolled out in the rest of the organization. And we've got once a year, we've got our medical aid coming in to measure blood pressure and, all of that. We're doing amazing when you are experiencing burnout, you, the one that's driving well-being, when you're not resting, when you're not managing your stress, when you're not driving those healthy boundaries, you will not make the impact that needs to be made. And so this is my soapbox moment to really just emphasize the importance of starting with me. How am I showing up as a well-being victor, someone who is not part of this 80% stat? I really hope that the 50 odd people in this room will be part of the 20% stat, because we are being watched. We might not know it, but we are being watched. I heard the other day saying that HR is like the thermostat, the way that we deal with or the way that we role model certain behaviors actually give permission to others to, or it shows the atmosphere and what we're wanting to cultivate. So yeah, let's see who is our winner. So in third place, well done, we've got CK. And in second place, we've got KJ. And in first place, we've got Shweta. Well done, Shweta. Awesome. I'm going to hand over to Tegan to take us through some of the practical aspects of what Wellbeing 3.0 looks like.
Can you see my screen?
We can, in the
Okay.
right way.
Third time lucky. Cool. I'm going to jump into it. I know there isn't a lot of time, so I'll try and cover what I can with the time that we have, and then maybe leave 2 minutes for questions. But if you do have questions along, maybe pop them in the chat box and we can start to respond to them. But jumping straight into it, so following on from what Lemay has just said, and the theme of from low power mode to human-centered design, that's exactly what we aim to do when we consult with clients that are coming to us about well-being. I think we all know that saying by now that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so in the world of well-being, that really couldn't be more true. Well-being isn't what's written in policy or in our policy documents, it's what's lived in practice. And so it's not about those perks that you're offering. Like May says, it's not about the sexy apps. It's really about the permission for people to pause, breathe, and be human without needing to ask. I think that's the big thing. And so as we've shared throughout today, 70% of employees feel unsupported in their well-being. And I promise you, companies are spending hundreds of thousands on EVPs or whatever else it might be. So it's definitely not because there's a lack of programs. It's because the culture doesn't allow people to recharge, rest, or speak honestly about how they're doing. And so what does it take to move from that low power mode, where people are running literally on fumes, to a truly human-centered workplace? Again, to Anati's point, it's not just another initiative, it's a full upgrade, and it's a shift of culture, one that sees well-being as shared strategic and systemic practice, and it's not just something that HR owns. So how do we make it more lived and lasting? And I really want to introduce this idea that a well-being culture is one that is a resilience culture. I'm just checking that you can also hear me.
I'm sure she'll be back in a second.
Cool. Can you hear me now? Am I back? I think I'm back.
Are you back? Okay,
We're
cool.
having a good technology day. Zoom just closed.
No, we're not.
Cool. Sorry, I'm not sure where you lost me. But
Here is good.
okay, cool. So a true wellbeing culture is one that is really resilient. And that's what I want to emphasize today is how do we build the resilience in our culture? That's really what is at the heart of Wellbeing 3.0. And so we're not just trying to create happy teams or just avoid burnout. We're trying to build workplaces where people can actually sustain their performance through pressure, adapt to change, and then bounce forward from challenge. The reality is we can't shift the challenges that employees are facing unless they're obviously caused by the organization and terrible leaders. But there are external forces that we can't shift. And so how do we build well-rested, high-performing organizations? So that resilience doesn't just come from pushing through, it comes from how we manage well-being in a smart, systemic, and human way. And in fact, resilience is what emerges when well-being is done well. And so if we break it down, when we are protecting our physical well-being, we're fueling stamina and sustained effort. When we support emotional well-being, we're helping people regulate, reframe, and respond, and not just simply react. And when we nurture psychological safety, again, Lemay mentioned how important this is, people then feel free to speak up, ask for help, and actually admit struggle, which then allows us to connect, which halves a lot of the load that we're feeling. And when we invest in social well-being, we create access to empathy, connection, and shared strength. And lastly, when we connect people to purpose and meaning, we give them the why to keep going when things get tough. And so those are some of the ingredients of resilient teams. And like I said, the same building blocks of a strong well-being culture. So when we say well-being 3.0, we're really talking about making resilience repeatable, relational, and real, and not just something that we're hoping for, but something that we actually design into the way people work and lead. So let's have a look at what that looks like in action. And a real well-being culture actually looks like some of these signs on the slides, and what it doesn't look like. So the truth is, a lot of people say they care about well-being because that is the new catchphrase that we should be caring about. But the way that the people experience that work environment tells a completely different story. It's like I said, it's not something that's written in a policy. It's actually how people behave when no one is watching. And it's felt in those small everyday moments. So how meetings are run, how leaders respond when someone's struggling, and how safe it feels to take a proper lunch break or switch off, because often I think we're missing that. In hybrid spaces especially, well-being starts to become more invisible, and that's why we need to be so intentional with the culture. So let's walk through the 4 signs of well-being 3.0 and the contrasts that show up when it's missing. So if we have a look at the first one, which is rhythmic, a well-being culture is rhythmic. That means there are ongoing rituals that support recovery and not just the occasional perks. In hybrid teams, this might look like protected deep work blocks. So there's 90 minutes to really get that focus down. Walking meetings or no meeting Fridays. And actually sticking to that, by the way, because I think that's also something people keep on trying. But then it becomes this beautiful free day that when we run out of time, Monday to Thursday, we can slot meetings into. It's also things like energy check-ins during virtual stand-ups or encouraging teams to work with cycles of focus and rest. And so then what you'll start to see is that rest is respected and not judged, and it's part of how performance is sustained. Teams bounce back quicker after disruption because rest and recovery are actually normalized. And then teams can actually share and reflect on setbacks together. So learning becomes part of the rhythm and not just a reaction. What it doesn't look like is a once-off wellness day or an email telling people to take care of themselves while they're stuck in back-to-back Zoom calls. A rhythmic culture helps people manage their energy consistently, not just when things are falling apart. It's human-centered, so that means it's built around the real lives and challenges of your people and not just generic policies. Again, I keep going back to hybrid work because I think that's the reality of a lot of our lives, as well as our clients' lives and people that we're working with. So this becomes even more important there because we lose that human-centered well-being very quickly. And it's the one where people feel seen, supported, and safe to show up as their whole selves, not just as performers. And so when we're hybrid, it's super easy to switch our screens on when we're feeling our best. But the minute that camera goes off, people are dealing with parenting, neurodiversity, hybrid fatigue, grief, all sorts of real life context behind the screen. And so we need to support all of those things and design support to meet those lived experiences. And so when we are human-centered, it looks like leaders who create space for honest conversations. Flexibility is based on trust and mutual need, and policies are shaped with empathy, not just compliance in these cultures. It's woven into how transitions are managed, how workload is planned, and how people are treated when they're struggling, not just when they're succeeding. Lastly, it's manager-owned. Or thirdly, rather. Why? Because managers shape 70% of the team climate. So they're either energy multipliers or energy drainers. And a culture that prioritizes well-being sees line leaders as active agents. Managers are checking in on energy, not just delivery. They're modeling boundaries, like Lume just said. They need to be the ones that are showing up in the way that they want their organization to behave and feel. They normalize asking for help. In hybrid teams, this might mean explicitly encouraging camera off time or making well-being part of regular one-on-ones, or even just saying, I'm logging off now. I hope you're doing the same. So understanding that when we put humanity before output, it actually gets you more. What it doesn't look like is managers avoiding tough conversations, emailing at midnight. You can't tell your employees they need to rest and switch off, and then you're mailing them at all sorts of hours in the morning. Of course, that's going to get their heart rate up when they open their eyes or when they see that notification when they're trying to relax with their families. You cannot praise overwork as commitment and then expect your employees not to burn out. So if your line leaders are burnt out, your culture will be too. Lastly, system embedded. So that means it shows up in how work gets done. It's not just well-being programs sitting in HR, it's your meeting norms. So it's your team norms, it's your performance reviews and project rhythms. All of those things include those well-being markers so that you're tracking them and making sure that psychological safety is actually nurtured at every level. People can speak up, slow down, or ask for help. In hybrid contexts, this might mean tracking energy and resilience data, not just KPIs, and designing workflows that prevent digital fatigue, because I think that's what a lot of people are dealing with at this moment. It's creating shared agreements for communication boundaries, like no messages after 6 or don't expect instant replies. That was my favorite, is somebody had a tagline, one of our clients, that said, I might be messaging you at late hours, but I don't expect a response. Okay, I'm super mindful of time. And so I'm just quickly going to run through these 4 aspects rather than getting into them in detail. But how do we start building that resilient well-being focused culture? And it definitely comes from a leadership shift. Leaders need to be the ones who are role modeling energy and not just endurance. They're setting the tone for permission, pacing, and recovery. And so if they hide their stress or glorify burnout, their teams will do the same. So it looks like normalizing boundaries. Shared responsibility looks more like designing well-being into the workflow. So resilience is built together in how we work, how we rest, and how we connect. And so if we have realistic goals, pacing, and cycles of recovery built into the workflow, we're helping the team recover in a more healthy way. Team rituals and psychological safety also fall into this. But this means it's also carried through in all sorts of different departments. So from top all the way down to the bottom, it's everybody's responsibility. And on that note, employee ownership is a really big concept here. So people need to make their own well-being a daily practice. As much as the organization needs to set up the system for you to thrive in, it's also your responsibility to take ownership of what you're doing at home, how much you're sleeping, what food you're putting into your body, how much you're moving your body, and how purposeful you find your job too. So definitely employee ownership. And then lastly, there are some good tools, which we will share with you after this, that you can link into your culture and into your systems and into your strategies that allow well-being to form part of each one of those different areas.
Thank you so much for that, Tegan and LeMay. I think we've gotten a lot of insight into well-being and a lot of insight into the overall picture that we're trying to build for you. So we'll definitely send the slides to you after the session. But if there are any questions, you're welcome to ask them. We will stay for another 5 to 10 minutes. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for joining us for this webinar. It's been lovely to have you all. And I hope you have a lovely evening and eat lekker dinner. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone.